Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you again for stopping by. My home thoughts started this morning because I come in quite early before everyone else gets in with Can You West, I Wonder, on extremely loud 11, as they used to say in that wonderful movie I can't remember. It was about a band, and he keeps going on saying, look at my amplifier, it goes to 11. There are dead stars that still shine because their light is trapped in time. Where do I stand in this light which does not strictly exist? Don DeLillo in Cosmopolis. And then I like this one. I don't want your candor. I want your soul in a silver thimble. Don DeLillo again, and finally another two. People think about who they are in the stillest hour of the night. I carry this thought, the child's mystery and terror of this thought. I feel this immensity in my soul every second of my life. And one last quote from Underworld: longing on a large scale makes history. Then I remembered my photograph of the flower display at the Ritz-Carlton in Dubai. I'm going to put that up as well. This is the headline in a Reuters article. President Barack Obama is fighting his last campaign, mostly at staid democratic fundraising events in hotel ballrooms and the private homes of donors, a far cry from the huge crowds who turned out in droves during his White House runs. It is striking it has happened to Obama, whose Yes We Can campaign in 2008 generated enormous crowds and enthusiasm. I think in part the issue is the president's very cerebral nature, which actually veils, in point of fact, a very aggressive 21st century warcraft, because warcraft is statecraft, which encompasses this kneecapping of the oil price, simultaneous two-pivot strategy into Asia and Russia, and much more, and a very aggressive use of currency, cyber, sanction warfare, infinitely more subtle than shock and awe. And I think that's in part what leads a lot of Americans to miss how aggressive the president is as an exponent of the US national interest, as defined by, I suspect, the US national security complex, if they thought about it properly. New rules or a game without rules, says Vladimir Putin. He's been out there putting out a lot of content. And it took me back to that piece on the 6th of October when I said current world affairs are fluid and uncertain. And took me back again to Don DeLillo, that's why it popped up in my home thoughts, who wrote in Mao 2, in societies reduced to blur and glut, terror is the only meaningful act. There's too much everything, more things and messages and meanings than we can use in 10,000 lifetimes. Only the terrorists stand outside. The culture hasn't figured out how to assimilate him. It's confusing when they kill the innocent. But this is precisely the language of being noticed, the only language the West understands. The way they determine how we see them, the way they dominate the rush of endless streaming images. According to The Independent, ISIS attacked Idlib, and Assad's army leaders were slaughtered as jihadists nearly take Syrian provincial capital. Syria almost lost its second city to the jihadists of ISIS in Jabhat al-Nusra last night, when hundreds of fighters stormed into Idlib, captured the newly installed governor's office, and began beheading Syrian army officers. By the time government troops recaptured the building, at least 70 soldiers, many senior officers, had been executed, leaving one of the oldest cities in Syria in chaos. They were slaughtered, a message to Damascus said, before the army was able to declare Idlib saved. The ferocity of the attack, some soldiers managed to call Damascus to alert the government to their imminent execution, shows just how hard-pressed the Syrian regime is in its battle against the same enemy that the US President Obama has promised to degrade and destroy. Degraded was the one thing the armed men who stormed Idlib appeared not to be. And I concluded by saying, après Assad, le déluge, I think. There is a video out of the IS hostage John Cantley speaking from Kobani. Al-Ittisam, an official Islamic State media wing, released a video on October 27 showing British hostage John Cantley in a broadcast from Kobani. The Islamic State has released 5 propaganda videos of Cantley since his kidnapping in Syria in November 2012. John Cantley suggests that claims made by Western media suggesting an IS retreat in Kobani are unfounded, and that instead IS militants have nearly complete control of the city. I think IS is going to boomerang big onto some of their sponsors. And then, going back to this sort of extraordinary use of video footage to make that case, it's all appealing not to, interestingly enough, people in these countries, but appealing to the Western world, and I mentioned that before. I saw this tweet by US NATO in Poland. US Polish Air Forces trained together at 33rd Air Base, Powitz Air Base. I thought it was a nice photograph. And then interesting article on population. The inexorable demographic momentum of the global human population is rapidly eroding Earth's life support system. Professor Corey Bradshaw and Professor Barry Brook. Even a catastrophic mass mortality event of 2 billion deaths over a hypothetical window in the mid-21st century would still yield around 8.5 billion people by 2100. There are currently 7.1 billion people on Earth, and demographers estimate that this number could rise to about 9 billion by 2050, and as many as 25 billion by 2100. Although this is based on current fertility rates, which are expected to fall over the coming decades, of course, most of that population growth is going to happen here. Global population has risen so fast over the past century that roughly 14% of all the human beings that have ever lived are still alive today. That's a sobering statistic. And then saying we were surprised that a 5-year World War III scenario mimicking the same proportion of people killed in the First World War and Second World War combined barely registered a blip on the human population trajectory this century. Took me back to Don DeLillo's famous comment in Mao 2, the future belongs to crowds. Crowds feature heavily in the book, from the opening crowds of thousands at the mass wedding at Yankee Stadium. This is of a Reverend Moon wedding. That's how it starts, and their parents, and they're in the audience, and they're watching the scene unfold, and their daughter's somewhere down there. I mean, it's just extraordinarily gripping. To the crowds living in Tompkins Square Park, to the thousands of mourners at the Ayatollah's funeral. I remember that. That was the first sort of history's live that I'd ever watched, actually. And I watched it in the UK as observed on television by Karen. The nature of crowds and their relation to personal and collective identity are explored. In predicting an age of terror in which the major work involves mid-air explosions, crumbled buildings before 9/11, I add, Don DeLillo was eerily ahead of his time in contemplating the profound effect that political terror was soon to have on American society. The question of the efficacy of art in the context of dogmatism and violence of a massive scale is central to the narrative. In preparing the novel, Don DeLillo's editor said, long before he had written anything, Don told me he had 2 folders, one marked art and the other marked terror. Just 2 years before the novel was published, Khomeini issued a fatwa calling for the death of Rushdie after his publication of the Satanic Verses. And New York Post photographers had ambushed J.D. Salinger in New Hampshire. DeLillo cited the published Salinger photograph and a photograph of a unification church blessing ceremony he came across as inspiration for the book. I didn't know it at the time, but these two pictures would represent the polar extremes of Mao too, the arch-individualist and the mass mind, from the mind of the terrorist to the mind of the mass organization. In both cases, it's the death of the individual that has to be accomplished before their aims can be realized. I'll put up a photograph of a mass wedding. Currency markets: euro 127.05, a little bit firmer. Dollar index 85.52, a little bit heavy. Japanese yen 107.84. Japanese yen might be a small buy here. Swiss franc 0.9493. Pound 161.30. Aussie 0.8819. So both the pound and the Aussie holding. Indian rupee 61.37. South Korean won has rebounded to 10.50.50. The Real 252.27 dropped 1.9%, weakest level on a closing basis since April 2005. Market not enamored with Rousseff. The drop was the largest among 31 major currencies tracked by Bloomberg. Egyptian pound 715.07. The rand still below 11, 10.95.99. The dollar has strengthened 5.9% in the past 3 months. The yen has fallen 0.7% and the euro has depreciated 0.5%. I think we've got another big rally coming in the dollar. I'll put up a 1-year chart of the dollar index, and I think we're in a little bit of a retracement, trading a little heavy for now, but what I wrote on the 29th of September, a small window for sharks as dollar rises. It's just gotten going, and I think it's going to go much higher. There will be blood in the water. This small window, a little bit longer than I thought there would be, to be the sharks. And on that note, I'll put up a photograph of the shark in Dubai Mall. The key is going to be the tone of the Fed statement, and I think the tone will be extremely cautious. Fellow at Barclays Bank, in the near term, the dollar's going to be heavy. The FOMC indicated at its September meeting that it planned to end its bond purchase program this month. That's what I expect. Euro dollar just above 127. I'll put up a 3-month chart. Twitter reported that timeline views clocked 181 billion. The monthly active users rose 23% to 284 million. And that was a run rate slightly below the 24% in the previous 3 months when the World Cup helped drive traffic, apparently. Twitter executives noted on Monday that the service's reach is actually far greater than its 284 million users. That's a fair point. Citing hundreds of millions who visit the website or are exposed to Twitter content without logging on. Timeline views per user, which measures engagement, slid 7% globally to 636. Views slid 6% in the US to 774. Overall, total timeline views of 181 billion slightly missed analysts' expectations. However, they made a few changes, one of which is they've reduced page refreshes, and consequently that pushed down timeline views by. I'm bullish about Twitter, actually. I think these are buying opportunities. And more than nearly 1,700 days ago, I attended a function at Westgate, and it was called Exploring the State of the Now. And Twitter's all about that. I think I joined Twitter around that time. Crude oil, I'll put up a 5-day chart, $80.75. I think it's going a lot lower still. Contract retreated just 1 US cent yesterday. Prices are down 18% year to date, but considerably higher from June highs. OPEC is next scheduled to discuss output policy on November 27th in Vienna. And as I wrote on the 13th of October, who kneecapped crude oil? The US administration, in fact, has turned price slasher. And like in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, oil has been sliced up and real good. The US has flooded the oil market, and the commodity is now a geopolitical spear. It is the US that is the new price setter for the oil markets, and that is a deep and important geopolitical development. New price levels will have immediate and enormous geopolitical and financial knock-on effects. It will place intolerable pressure on oil producers, and particularly those operating from a higher base price. My point is that Barack Obama has taken control of the crude oil cockpit. He is in charge of the aeroplane. He has control of all the instruments, and it has been a wild ride for the last few weeks. But it could get a whole lot wilder. I'll put up a 1-year chart and you can see the dramatic fall down. And one of my outlier predictions was $50 a barrel, because crude oil overshoots big time. And so essentially I think it's going to continue to trade to the downside. I'm looking for at least 70 and 60. Diana Layfield, who runs Standard Chartered Africa, told me 60. Gold, I'll put up a 1-year chart, 1227.68. I think renewed dollar strength is going to take that down. Brazilian real fell to 9-year lows as Rousseff wind dimmed outlook. I'll put up a 1-year chart. The Bovespa also fell 2.8%. I was coming to Africa. My weekend piece was about how there's been plenty of action in Africa and its markets of late. I spoke about the collapse in oil prices weighing on African oil producers such as Nigeria, and mentioned how Trinidad and Tobago turned away in Gabon crude oil shipments, and said I had not considered that risk. Ebola continues to gain traction. I think it's all about the escape velocity. And we've just got to keep an eye on that. South African oil shares up 3.88%, turned 0.36% higher, but it's been on a big losing streak, having corrected 4,363 points since July 29 through this morning. I learned that South Africa's murder rate is about 6.7 times higher than in the US, and increased to 32.2 per 100,000 people in the year through March. Frightening. ShopRite is reporting strong growth, particularly in the rest of Africa in terms of its markets. Dollar Rand, I'll put up a 6-month chart. I think this is where it tops out, the Rand rebound, and go back through 11. Egyptian pound has been rock steady, 715.02. The Egyptian stock market down 1.44% yesterday. Sinai, concerns about that must be worrying in the market. It remains up 27.51% year to date, but it has fallen 1,163 points since the 30th of September. Interesting piece in Asia Times. Sinai is both heaven and hell. Sinai is both heaven and hell. This triangular desert boasts an arid landscape of hopeless horizons, often interrupted by leftover military hardware from previous wars. The land is comprised of breathtaking beaches, incredible history, and a fusion of fascinating cultures that reach back into the past, as far as ancient times can possibly go. This thrilling land of contradictions is amazing yet lethal. And that challenge in the Sinai is, Assisi is just going to respond in a security way. I don't know whether that's going to work or it continues to escalate. The Nigerian oil shares down 6.303% year to date. Oil prices weighing on Nigerian assets, plus you have an election. I like this photograph from the series Turn It Up, Nigeria, New York Times. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 3.729% year to date. The Economist Intelligence Unit has lowered its growth forecast for Angola from 5.5% to 4.8%, and said oil production would not reach 2 million barrels per day in 2015. Tanzania announced that the construction of a Chinese-funded port and special economic zone in Tanzania worth at least $10 billion will start in July 2015. The planned Bagamoyo port, new investment in Dar es Salaam, other spending on roads and railways are part of Tanzania's efforts to become a transport hub that could challenge the dominance of Mombasa in neighboring Kenya. Signed a memorandum of understanding, helped develop the Bagamoyo economic zone. We will do everything possible to ensure that this project takes off because it will bring enormous economic benefit to the entire country. This is President Kikwete. I'll put up an image of Bagamoyo. And I said over the weekend there's a trend change in matters, Tanzanian capital markets and more. And investors would do well to pay attention. The Dar es Salaam All-Share Index, of course, is the best performing stock market in Africa, up 43% since the start of the year. Interesting interview by the FT with Vimal Shah of Bidco. That links on Rich Wrap-Ups. I saw this photograph, which was tweeted by the President Uhuru Kenyatta with the head of US Africa Command, General David Rodriguez, and Ambassador Bob Godek, who paid me a courtesy call today, which took me back to June 2012 when I did an interview on CCTV. And I said, taking a broader sweep, it is clear that the United States and US Africa Command has carved out a much more forward position on the African continent. In some respects, Barack Obama's pivot to Asia detours through Africa. China has made a parabolic advance across the African continent, and one of the desired side effects of staunching the Al-Qaeda advance is that it also counters the Chinese advance via the insertion of US hard power. The US cannot challenge China's extreme dollar diplomacy, but it can insert hard power with which it can tilt the African pitch. In that respect, that was interesting, was it not? A sine qua non of President Obama's pivot to Asia's US-NATO power projection over the Indian Ocean. I've said that before. I'll put up an image of Pemba Island, Mozambique, seen from the sky, another one of the setting sun in Lamu. In my piece over the weekend, I said the sharp fall in oil prices will see super petrol prices below 100 shillings per litre before year end. This will prove a powerful catalyst for improved consumer sentiment and improved spending. I learned that Kenya has drilled a total of 69 wells since oil exploration efforts began, with encouraging discoveries in 3 basins. UBS estimated that we're going to be 6 basins. So far, 12 of the wells are discovery wells, with 9 containing crude oil and 2 holding natural gas, while the Anza Basin contains both crude oil and natural gas. Kenya shilling, 89.458, a little bit softer, but it still has been a Teflon shilling, retreated about 4% year to date. Nairobi All-Share up 16.18%, but has corrected 3.991% since closing at a record on the 22nd of September. NSE 20 up 5.0345% year to date, has corrected 232 points since closing at a more than 6-year high, above 5,400 on September 23. There is a link so you can check every single listed share, and just repeating that I think lower oil prices are going to be very supportive for the equity market. The inflation rate is headed lower, and I think that will bring the whole interest rate structure lower, which will help equities maintain a more than 3-year bull run. Once again, thanks for stopping by.